In our last session, we have discussed how we can make use of our link queue to entities to fetch the data from the database. Today, we are going to discuss one important concept that is what is lazy loading, what is eager loading, and what is explicit loading. What exactly the meaning of loading the related entities, right? When we need to use what approach, right? What is the difference between them, right? How they are exactly going to be worked, right? Everything we are going to discuss in today's session. So basically, let us start discussing with this concept called eager loading. So before discussing eager loading, right? Let me first make the application ready, right? And then I will discuss what are the different types of loading approaches are there, and then we will start discussing the right what I can say eager loading, right? So basically, what I'm going to do, right? So whenever I'm talking about loading the related entities, means we need multiple databases, not one or two. So we need to show the example, right? How we can load multiple entities, how we can load multiple level of entities of a main entity. So for that purpose, what we are going to do, we are going to modify our application, right? So we are going to create multiple database table for our application. Let us first modify the student and standard entities, which we have already created. So go and update the student entity, and you can see the student entity having few properties like student ID, first name, last name, standard ID, right? And this is the standard table. So basically, this will make this as the right foreign key, which is going to be pointing to the standard table, standard ID column. So this standard ID column will become the foreign key, right, in this student table, which is going to point to the standard table. Again, I'm going to create right student address table, which is going to store the address of the student, as well as I'm going to create a courses, right? List of courses the student is going to be taken. Those list of courses also it is having a foreign key, right? So let us create the rest of the table. So before creating the rest of the tables, let me first modify the standard table, right? So if you see, there is a class we have already created that is nothing but your standard class. See, and here you can see the standard table having a list of students as well as having list of teachers, right? So it's having a collection property which is pointing to student table. Also, it is having a collection properties which is pointing to teachers table. So this teacher and all this, right? Okay, let me close everything, close all but this one. So this is my student table and that is my uh, standard table. Let me create the rest of the table. So we need to create one class file for storing the student address, because if you see, we need to create the student address. So let's go to this entities folder, add a new class file. So this is going to hold the student address. Okay. Then let me copy paste this code. So in this case, what would it will do? So this table is going to create primary key with the name as a student ID. So basically, you can say this is the student ID by default. What is the default convention? That what we are not following here. This is the reason why explicitly I'm specifying the key name as a student ID. Later I will show you, right? Later in the sense tomorrow, what is the default convention? How it is going to generate the table columns, right? Primary key, foreign key, indexes, right? All these things we are going to discuss tomorrow. But for now, just remember the default naming convention is not followed by this, right? Class to generate the primary key. This is the reason why explicitly I'm using this data annotation attribute to specify that this is going to be my primary key. And you can see this is having address, mobile, email, and I want to make right student ID as the foreign key so that it will have one-to-one relationship with the student table. So guys, here you can see this is a student, this is a reference navigation property, and if you go to this class, right, the student address, this is also a reference navigation property. When you have right, if both the class having the reference navigation property, not the collection navigation property, then it will make one-to-one relationship between these two tables, right? So student having one address and this address belongs to a single student. That means there is a one-to-one relationship. Again, what are the different kind of relationships? How we can implement one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many relationship, right? All these things we are going to discuss in detail in our coming sessions, right? Next, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create the collection and navigation property. So, sorry, the course navigation, the course entity. So let's create a class file with the name course.cs, then copy paste this code, right? So now what I'm doing here, you can see this is going to be my primary key. This is course name. This is teacher ID. So you can see this course and a teacher, right? If you, we have not yet created this one, right? I will show you once I created, but in this case, you can see this course having a collection navigation property belongs to a student. That means one course can be taken by multiple students, right? One course can be taken by multiple students, and in this case, you can see one student can have multiple courses. That means here you can see we are having the collection navigation property. Here also we are having the collection navigation property. Means what? Means it is going to represent many to many relationship between students and the course. Means one student can have multiple course and one course can be taken by multiple students. That is nothing but your many to many relationships, right? Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to create the teachers.cs class file, right? Let me add this class file, add new class, teacher.cs. Right, guys, if you are getting confused related to this relationships, right, don't worry, we'll discuss this concept in detail, right? So here you can see teacher, and here you can see right, and you can see this is nothing but going to be my primary key. These are some of the basic details, and here you can see this is my standard ID. So better place this column just before the standard table, right? Just here, right? So in this case, what it will going to do, it is going to create the foreign key with the standard ID, and it is having this teacher one teacher can belongs to a single standard, and if you go to this, right, one standard can be taken by multiple teachers. So it is going to represent one to many relationships, right? Again, the teacher and again between this teacher and the courses table, if you look at this one, so right, one course can be taught by one teacher, and one teacher can teach multiple courses. So, the point that you need to remember, there is a one to many relationship, or you can say many to one. So, if you are going from the teacher side, one teacher can teach multiple courses. This is nothing but one to many relationships. Now, if you go to course, then you will see this is one course can be taught by one teacher. So, one to one or one to many. Right. So this is these are the database right classes, model classes, that what we need in our application. So basically you can see we have the standard entity, we have the student entity, we have student address entity, we have courses entity, and we have teacher entity. Now if I give you one brief introduction, right, so this is going to be my standard entity. This is going to be one table having standard ID, standard name, and the standard description. And I want to make this standard entity, right? I want to make this as the principal entity, and whenever I'm going to create a student entity or teacher entity, this would belongs to a particular standard, right? And for to make that in right, to make that relationship possible, here what I'm doing here, I'm creating a collection property, right? So it will make one to many relationship. One standard, right, it can be taken by multiple student. One standard can also be taken by multiple teacher, right? So the point that you need to remember, if you are right, so the point that you need to remember what, right? So to implement the relationship, right, what you need navigation properties. So what you need navigation. So navigation property, again, it is of a two types. What are the types? One is reference navigation, right? Another one is collection navigation. Clear? So what, sir, what do you mean by reference navigation and what do you mean by collection navigation? If you create a reference type property. So in this case, you can see standard, it's a reference type property. So this is nothing but your reference navigation. If you create a collection, right, here you can see the type is a I collection. So this is nothing but your collection and navigation property. So first of all, you need to understand how many types of a navigation property are there. There are two types of a navigation property. One is reference navigation property, another one is collection navigation property. Clear? Clear, guys? How many types of navigation properties are there?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Right. And to whenever we are going for a relationship, right? So whenever we are going for a relationship means it is going to be implemented in database by using the primary key and the foreign key. Clear or not? So if you have any basic idea related to the database, then you should know there is something called primary key and there is something called foreign key, and then both these having a common key, and based on the common column, based on this common column, we can maintain the relationship. So at least if you want to maintain the relationship, how many tables you need at least?
Two tables.
Two tables. So two tables means in our right, if we are going for a code first approach, then we need at least two entities or not?
Yes.
Two entities, or you can say two model classes, right? Two entities or two model classes, right? Let's assume this is model class 1, right? And we are having another class called model class 2. So if you are having a reference navigation property in model class 1 and reference navigation property as well as in model class 2, same level, right? So it is model 1 having, right, model 2 reference navigation property, and model 2 having model 1 reference navigation property, means it is going to be
Thank you.
one to one relationship. Clear? Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. So it is, if your model 1 having the model 2 reference navigation property, and model 2 having model 1 reference navigation property, it is going to implement one-to-one relationship. In our example, if you look at the student table, it is having the student address. So this is a reference navigation property or collection navigation property?
A reference.
Reference. And if you go to student entity, it is having the student in a right navigation property. It is a reference or collection?
Reference.
Reference. So means if both are
Collection.
having the reference navigation property, means what kind of a relationship it is going to implement?
Okay.
What?
One to one.
Guys, one to one. So in the case of one to one, can we have, right, multiple student belongs to a same address ID?
No.
So can we have right multiple rights? So means what? It means this whenever I'm making one entry in this table, right? With that entry, only the same student ID exist once. Because in this case, right, whenever we are implementing the one-to-one relationship, in that case, right, how we can implement means we need to make the primary key as the foreign key. So in this case, inside the student address table, the student ID will be the primary key, as well as the same student ID will also become the foreign key. So once the same the key, once the primary key becomes the foreign key, in that case, it is going to implement one-to-one relationship between the two entities. Clear? Okay. So now you just tell me. So in this case, model 1 having model 2 collection and navigation property, and this model 2 having model 1 reference navigation property. So in this case, what kind of a relationship it is going to implement? So either you can say many to one or one to many, no issue. So in this case, it is going to represent one to many relationship, because in this case, you are having one entity, and that right entity can have multiple child entities, right? So if you take the examples in this case, right, if you go to the student class, right, and here you can see it is a collection application property related to, right, standard. And if you go to the standard, you can see it is having multiple students. So what it means? It means it is going to represent, right, in one of the entity, it is having a reference navigation property, but the other side, it is having a collection and navigation property. So if that is the scenario, means what? It is going to implement a one-to-many relationship, right? So what we mean by one-to-many relationship? One-to-many relationship means particular student can have a single student ID, but the same student ID, right? But the same student ID can be taken by multiple students. So this is nothing but your one-to-many relationships. Clear, guys? Yes or no? Guys, are you getting the point or
Yes.
not? So why you guys are silent? I
Yes.
don't know.
Yes.
So you have to
Sir,
participate.
why we are creating it virtual
That is
property?
what. Right. So the same question, I think in the day one, someone asking me why you mark this property as virtual, right? And I have told you that once time will come, I will explain why I'm marking this property as virtual. So definitely I'm going to explain in today's session why I'm marking this property as virtual. Don't worry. So I will explain. So whatever I'm explaining currently, just focus on that point, right? Virtual, why I'm marking this property as virtual? I think someone asked me in the first class itself, and I have told that I will explain definitely this question. So now let us try to understand, right? So here what I'm doing, the model one having a reference property of a collection type, and model two also having a reference property of a collection type. So in that case, it is going to implement many to many relationship, right? And in this case, you can see, in this case, if you look at this student entity, so this courses, right? So one student can taken multiple courses, and one course can be taken by multiple students. So this is nothing but your many to many relationships. That means both are having collection and application. Is that clear, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Clear up.
Yes.
So this is
Yes.
the default convention which is followed by, or this is the convention which is followed by entity framework to generate the properties, right? Generate the relationships. So once we have create, right? Once we have create the model classes, then next what we need to do? We need to we need to configure these model classes within our EB context class. So this is my context class constructor. This is my unconfiguring method. Here I'm using this option builder log to method to show, right, what kind of SQL statements are generated, right? And this is my option builder that use SQL server method, right? Here I'm specifying the connection string to which database it should right communicate. This method I have not yet used. I will use this method, right, once I start to Fluent API configurations. Now I'm adding the domain classes. You can see a DB set of T properties. So see whatever the domain classes you want to be generated as part of your database, those classes you should register here, right? So you can see here I'm registering courses entity, standard entity, student address, and the teacher. See, teacher, courses, student address, student standard, right? So all these things are generated here. So how many entities I have added here? 5 entities I have added here. And whatever the property name we specified here, right? That is going to be, right, that is going to be the table name in the database, and whatever the columns, right, right, whatever the scalar property we have added here, right, scalar property means the property which is going to store a single value, right? For each scalar property it is going to generate a database column, and this is not true in the case of foreign keys, right? Foreign key, if you specify, it is going to generate automatically. It is also going to generate the foreign key if the scalar property for the foreign key is not specified. We'll discuss what is primary key, what is foreign key, what are the different right configuration it follows, right? All these things we are going to discuss. So now you can see I have registered, right, all the entities within my context class. So once we have done this, right? Did we change the model classes? Yes, we have modified the student and standard entities, as well as we have added few more entities. So if that is the case, then what we need to do next is we need to sync this right context class with our database. So currently, if you look at the database, only two tables are there. If you look at this EF core DB1, then you will see only two tables are there, and the structure is also going to be varied, right? Currently, you can see standard ID name description, and in the student table, some different columns are there, right? Which is not same as our student entity. So what we need to do? We need to sync our database with our context class, right? Or you can say we need to sync the database with our application. In order to sync these things, then what we need to do? Again, we need to generate the what we need to do. Again, we need to generate the configuration file, or you can say migration. So if you want to generate the migration, you want to add the migration, what you need to do, you have two options. You can use .NET Core CLI, or you can use package manager console. So as we are developing the application using Visual Studio, right, so we have that flexibility. Just right click on this NuGet, right click, just select the tools, NuGet package manager console. Once you select these things, right, then this window is open. So what we need to do, we need to add a migration. So whatever the name we are going to provide, that name should not be exist here. So you can see create EF core DB1, EF core DB2. So these are the two migration already generated. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to provide this name. This name is not already exist there, right? Add migration EFA, create EFA core DB2. Create EFA core DB1 is there, create EFA core DB2 I'm giving. Guys, remember, whatever the name you are providing, that should not be existing already. If already exist, it will not create. And second, here you can see the project you need to select. By default, only one project is available, so that project is by default selected. If you are having multiple project within your select solution, right, where you want to create this migration, that right particular project you need to select. Once you provide this thing, right, then click on the click on the enter button. See, an operation was scaffolded that may result in the loss of a data. Please review the migration for accuracy. So what exactly he's saying? He's saying that this migration file is created successfully, but there might be a chance of a data loss. So please review this. Why it is saying like this? Because currently, if you look at the student table, we are having some data, right? We are having some data, and what are the column? Student ID, first name, last name, date of birth, height, weight, and standard ID. And if you go to this student class, see, you can see student ID, first name, last name, and standard ID is there. But do you have this date of birth, height, and weight columns are there in our new entity? Yes or no?
No.
This new entity does contain these three column. These three
No.
properties are there in the new entity.
No.
No. So if
No.
some of the properties, right, some of the columns are already there, some of the properties you have already there, right? And if those properties containing some data, and later if you are modifying, right, if you are removing those properties from your entity class, then you will get this right message that there is a result of the loss of a data. Please review the migration, right? And if you review the migration, then you will see that, right? Off means this date of birth is deleted, height is deleted, weight is deleted, right? So these are the things which is dropped, right? So you can see drop column, right? So it is containing which are the columns that needs to be dropped from the database. For the students table, date of birth column is going to be dropped. From the students table, height column is going to be dropped. From the students table, weight column is going to be dropped. Then what it is doing? It is going to create a table called student address, right? And whatever the properties and constant, that what it needs to apply. Again, it is going to create a table called the teachers. Again, it is going to create a table called the courses, right? And then you can see course student, right? Even though this course student entity you do not have seen here, right? You can see there is no course student entity, but in order to make the many-to-many relationship between the course and the student table, it is going to create this joining table, right? Which is going to contain the course ID as well as the student ID. and then it is going to create some of the indexes, right? Whichever the new table you created, right? Based on the primary key, it is going to create the clustered index. Based on the foreign key, it is going to create the non-clustered index, right? So these are the changes it is going to do within this migration file. So once you review these changes and once you satisfy yes, these are the columns which I am intentionally going to be delete. That's fine. So then what you need to do, you just go come here and update the database, right? So what code you need to write? You just need to write update database, right? So update space or directly update database. That's what I need to see, right? Okay. So update the database. This verbose command, if you want to see, right, what kind of SQL statement are going to be executed on the database, that what, right, you need to type. So here you can see update hyphen database space hyphen verbose. This verbose means it is going to display the generated script, right? What script is going to be executed on the database, that script it is going to display here also, right? Once you type this thing, press the enter button, right? Once you press the enter button, right, you can see many things are going to be executed on the database, right? And once execution successfully, you can see this done message, right? Once this is done, now come to our right database, refresh the database and see whether all these tables are getting created or not. So we are having 5 entities. Yes, we are having 5 entities, but in this case, you will see the sixth table, right? Whenever you are implementing many to many relationships, right, then it is going to create a joining table. So you can see one table, two table, three, four, fifth, and a sixth one. This is the course student. This is the joining table. So we are implementing one-to-many relationship between student and course. So it is creating one column for the course ID, another column for the student ID. So this is the joining table. But guys, remember one more thing. Nobody asked me this question, but let me explain this thing. Why this is EF migration history table? Can anybody tell me why this table is there?
If you want to roll back, then this table can help us.
Is this table going to be created whenever we create it, right? Whenever we are working with the database first approach?
No.
So this migration history table only going to be created, and this EF migration history table, right, tells that this database is going to be this database is generated using code first approach. So whenever you are implementing entity framework code first approach or entity framework code, right, code first approach, definitely you will see this migration history table. And this migration history table tells, right, what is the entity framework version, right? This is the version, and how many number of times you have created the migration. So how many times we have created? One time, two time, and three times. So this, as we have created the migration three times, right? You can see it is storing three versions, right? And this is the migration, right? One file, second file, and this is the third file. So whatever, how many number of times you have created the migration file, those information is going to be stored here. And later, right? And later, whenever you want to roll back to a previous version, right? In that case, you need to provide the name, and based on this name, right, it is going to update the data. So basically this migration history table going to tell how many times you have created the migration, right, and what is the migration ID, or this migration ID is nothing but it is similar the same name as of your this migration CS class file name, right? So we have, once we have created the database, right, then what we need to understand, we need to understand eager loading, right? So but before understanding eager loading, right, what we need
So
some
one
data.
question.
Yes.
Suppose like in code first approach, whatever we modify, we are going to generate this migration object to replicate it in into database every time.
You do not see, you do not need to create this .cs file. This file is going to be generated automatically whenever you create, right, this, whenever you execute this add migration command. Right? So once you execute this add migration command, automatically based on the changes on your context class and model classes, this file is going to be generated. You just need to execute this one.
So on each changes, can we
Each changes on each changes you need to execute this. Otherwise, right, once you do these changes, how entity framework will know right what are the changes you have made, right? Whether your model class is synced with your database or not. This is not possible. Yes, this is possible in our earlier entity framework, but not here. Here, every small changes or every changes you made to your entity, right, properties or right, any changes you made to the data content, DB context class or to the entities, right? You have to execute this add migration command. Only executing this add migration command is not enough, right? Why? So once you execute this add migration command, only this right migration file is going to be generated. Once you execute this migration command, then you need to execute this updated database command. Once you execute this updated database command, right? If I'm not providing any migration name, right, then what will happen? By default, what is the latest migration file that is going to be executed? If you provide the migration, any, so here I can provide create EF core DB1, EF core DB2, create EF core DB3, right? Anything you can give, and accordingly that migration file will use, and that and accordingly whatever changes are available within that migration file, right? The database is going to be updated accordingly. But most of the time,
so
we only use this update database because always we want to use the latest changes, right? That what we have created in our application. Clear?
yes, what about the data associated with the like dropping columns or updating columns?
See,
So
those columns are going to be those columns are going to be right. The data is going to be lost. Now. That is what I'm saying. This is the reason why it is saying, right? You can see currently we are having only three records. Why? Right? Earlier these three records are there, but what about the other columns? Those other columns it is deleted. It is deleted means the data is lost, and this is the reason why. Right before right, this is the reason why you can see this error, this warning we are getting, right? Yeah, an operation, right? Once you create the migration, what it is saying, an operation was scaffolded that may result in loss of data. And here, and it clearly saying that in this migration file, what you created, if you execute this migration file, right, using this update database command, then there might be some data loss. And that data loss is here. That height column, that date of birth column, that weight column, right? Those data is lost or not? And that message it is clearly showing here.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yes or no, guys? As you guys understand this
Yes.
concept? Okay.
Why
Now,
data get lost?
sorry,
Sir, why data get lost?
why data get lost?
Yes.
If you just tell me, if you are having a table having 10 columns, right? And if you
Yes.
drop three columns, then what will happen to the data of those three columns?
The rest 7
Hmm?
column out of 10 will remain.
Right? So my question, you understand my question? If you are having a table with 10 columns like 1, 2, 3, 4, and another 6 columns, right? And if
Okay.
you drop three columns from the same table, then what will happen to the data of those three columns?
And that will goes out.
Obviously, this is the same concept here applicable. Na? If you earlier the student table having earlier the student table having 7 columns, and now you are creating the model classes having only 4 columns. Then what will happen to those 3 columns data? Definitely, as we are going to drop those columns, the data is going to be lost.
So column as well as data in that will be
See.
network.
You just tell me, if you are dropping the column, then where it will store the data?
Oh, automatically that will remove.
Obviously, there is no other options. This is the basic SQL Server concept, right? I suppose not to right explain this concept, right? If you are having some column and if you drop that column, obviously, whatever data you are storing on that column, those are also going to be lost.
Right. Provided it is not a primary key column.
So the primary key column it means you can drop now. So once we have these things, then what I'm going to do, I'm going to modify, right? So modify in the sense, okay, let me first truncate this table, truncate table students. Okay, so let me do one thing. Let me delete this table. Why I'm deleting this table? Because I don't want existing data. I want everything from the scratch, right? Now come here and update the database again. I don't want to see the generated code. Now click on this one, right? So done. Now refresh this one. Entity frame or code DB is created. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to add these values, right? So you can see this is my standards table, teachers table, and courses table, students table, student address, course student. So these are the tables and these are the dummy data I want to insert. So the request for procedure course student failed because course student is a table. Insert into course student. So any issue here? Okay, let me check this one once more. So courses. So data is there in the courses table? No. Student table? No. Student address table? Okay. Right. So means data is not inserted. So what I'm going to do, use EF core DB1. Okay. Then insert into the standard table. The data inserted into the standard table. Now you can verify whether the data is inserted or not. Yes, data is inserted into the standard table. Now I'm going to insert the data into the teachers table. Now the data is inserted. You can verify, yes, the teacher table data is inserted. Now I'm going to insert the data into courses table. Yes, the data is inserted. Now you can verify the data. Yes, courses table inserted. Now I'm going to insert few data into the students table. Yes, data is inserted. Now you can verify. Yeah, this is the course students table. Next, what I'm going to do, I'm going to insert some data into the student address table. Yes, data is inserted. Okay. Next, I'm going to insert data into the course students table. Right. Again, the data is inserted into the course students table. Right. So, but now if you check this migration history table, then you will see, right, the number of times we generated this, right, what I can say, execute this update database command is no matter. How many times the migration file is created, that information it is going to capture, right? So you can see. So once our database table and data is ready, then we need to understand, right, how we can load the related entity. So in entity framework, right, or entity framework core, we can load the related entities in three different ways: eager loading, lazy loading, and explicit loading. Right? What exactly these three techniques refers to? These three techniques refer to loading the related entity of the main entities. The only difference is when to load the related entity or child entity of the main entity. So means what? Means you can load the related entity using these three different approaches. Only difference between these three different approaches is when to load the child entity or the main entity. So before moving further, first of all, we need to understand what do we mean by related entity, what do we mean by main entity. If you look at our student entity, this is my student entity. So inside the student entity, you can see we are having few reference properties. So in this example, student is the main entity. The standard student address, this course collection, these are nothing but my related entity, right? So the entity which you created as a reference property, as a collection navigation property, right? Either it is might be a reference navigation property or it might be a collection navigation property. That entity is said to be the related entity of the main entity. Here, student is the main entity, and these three are nothing but your related entity. And these related entities are going to be created by using the foreign keys only, right? So the question is, when I'm loading the student entity, do I need to load standard entity? Do I need to load the student address entity? Do I need to load the courses entity? When I need to load these three entities, that basically define eager loading, lazy loading, and explicit loading, right? So let us first understand what do we mean by eager loading. So eager loading in entity framework core loads related entities, right? Whenever we load the main entity in a single database query, right? So basically, right now, if I want to load all the students or a particular student, I need to write some kind of a select statement. So while I'm loading the student ID, first name, last name, I also need to load the student address. I also need to load the standard, and I also need to load the courses. So if that is the case, then how we can get, right? Now you guys tell me how I can get all the student standard, student address, and courses information of a particular student. If you are having the student table, if you are having the standard table, if you are having the student address table, and if you are having the courses table, right? And if you want to return the data from all these four database tables using a single query, then how you can achieve this? What concept you
With the
need to
help of
use?
join.
Exactly, right? So with the help of a join. So basically, whenever we are using eager loading in entity framework core, then it is going to use something called a join internally by using the left join, where the student is going to be the left side table, and the right join is nothing but your student address, and the courses table. So whenever we are using eager loading, internally entity framework make use of SQL join, and with a single database query, or you can say with a single write request, it retrieve, it load all the data from the database. So this is nothing but your eager loading. And in this case, if we are going for eager loading, right, it will, right, this approach is efficiently saves the bandwidth and the server CPU time. Why? Because only one request is sent to the database in one right, in a single database query or in a single round trip, right? It pastes the data from the database and return to the client. And this approach is going to, right, this approach is going to solve the problem called n plus one query problem. Does anyone having this n plus one query problem? Can anybody tell me what exactly this n plus one query problem? Anybody having any idea? Right. Now tell me, if I'm not using SQL join, right? If I'm not using SQL join, then how I can fetch this for the database table data? First of all, you need to fetch the student table data, where you will get the student ID. By taking the student ID, can I get the that particular student standard information?
Yes.
By taking that same student ID, can I get the student address student address details?
Yes. You can do it.
By taking the same student ID, can I get the list of student that list of courses that student has been taken? Can I get?
Yes.
So
Yes.
if I'm not using join, then how many query I need to write here?
3 queries.
3 plus 1 means total number of queries equals to 4. So
Actually,
this
4.
problem is nothing but your n plus 1 query problem. You have, which you can get in a single query. Here you need to use n plus 1. That n is going to be vary based on your requirement. So this n plus 1 query problem can be addressed by using the concept called eager loading. Why? Because with eager loading, with a single request, right, we can fetch the data from the database, right? Now, if you go and read this definition, you can understand. In order to write, eager loading is one of the approach provided by entity framework. What are the other two approaches? Other two approaches are lazy loading and explicit loading. We have not discussed yet. We will discuss them, right? So it is one of the approach to load the related data of an entity from the database. So, right? What do you mean by related data? Related data means nothing but the main entities and application property. This approach fetches the related data as part of the initial query. Means what? Now, whenever we are fetching the main entity data, internally it is also going to fetch the related entity data by using the concept called join, right? So basically its related data is being retrieved in a single database, right? Single round trip to the database. So by using a single query, it is going to return, right, all the data, right? Now the question is how we can achieve this, right? But now the question is how we can achieve this. To implement eager loading, right? The same, right, include method is provided to us. So whenever I'm saying same include method means what? Now in entity framework 6, right, if you are working with entity framework 6, then in entity framework 6 we are having this include method, load the related entities. The same include method we can also use here. In addition to this include method, entity framework also provides something called a then include extension method, and this extension method is going to load the data of multiple levels of related entities. So what do you mean by multiple level of related entities? We will discuss, right? I will show you practically. So this then include method is not available in entity framework. So by using this include or then include method, we can load the related entities, right? By default, guys, remember, by default, neither lazy loading, neither eager loading, nor what I can say explicit loading. Nothing is enabled. You have to do all these things manually. Let us try to understand how you can do this practically. So the point that you need to do, remember is you need to use either include method and then include method to implement lazy loading in your application, right? So now what I'm going to do, okay, let me open the program class and let me close all the related class files. And one more class file I need to open, which is always going to be used entity framework DB context class, right? So now what my requirement is, right? Now what my requirement is, load the related entities using eager loading. So while loading the student table data, I want to load the standard table data. So my question is, whenever I'm loading the student table data, I also want to load the standard table data. Now, if you go to student table data, this is my student data. While I'm loading the student data, I also need to load the standard information of that particular student. So how we can achieve this? And here we need to achieve this using the eager loading, right? So first of all, I'm discussing eager loading. In the case of eager loading, using a single database, right, query, it is going to fetch the data. So what we need to do, first of all, you need to load the main entity, which is in our case students entity, right? So here I'm going to load all the student entity and their corresponding address, right? So you can see I'm fetching all the student entity. You don't want to fetch all the student entity. You want to fetch a single student entity data. Yes, that is also possible. We will also discuss, right? So once I fetch the student entity, all the student entities, then I'm specifying the right related entity using this include method. So this include method, you can specify the related entity name, right? Either using a lambda expression or by using the string name. So here you can see I'm specifying the standard entity name by using the lambda expression, and here I'm specifying the right name by using the string name. So both of the options are available. Whichever approach you want to use, that approach you can use, right? So here you can see I'm using this students to, right? Here I'm specifying the related entity by using the string name, and here I'm specifying the related entity by using the lambda expression. And the same thing you can also achieve by using the query syntax, right? So the same thing you can also achieve by using the query syntax, right? So how you can write this using query syntax? See, first of all, write from is, so this is nothing but your join, right? Select star from students, join, right? Join, right? Standard, and then return all the data, right? This is nothing but after this context dot students, right? The way you are writing this statement, the same is going to be here. And again, if you want to specify these things, right? If you want to specify this thing using the string property name, right? You can also specify the property name like this. So these are the four different approaches, right? Using which you can load the related entity. Later, I will show you how you can include multiple related entities, multiple level of a related entity. Everything I'm going to discuss, don't worry. But now, in this example, what I'm doing, by using a single database query, I'm going to retrieve the student and the corresponding standard information, right? I'm going to fetch all the student data along with their corresponding to write standard information, right? So once you fetch the student info data, right? In this case, as I am using this tool list method, means it is going to execute the query. It will execute default query execution or immediate query execution, guys.
Immediate.
Immediate query
Immediate query.
execution means the query is going to be executed immediately and the result is going to stored inside this student's variable. And then I'm looping through the results and I'm printing the first name, the last name, whatever the standard name, and whatever the standard description. You can print all the properties, right? I'm just printing these properties for the, right, what I can say, simplicity. So only these 4 5 properties I'm here printing, right? Now run the application and see whether you are getting the data as expected or not. And let's see whether it is loading the data using a single query or it is using multiple database query. So you can see it is using the single SQL query by using the left join to fetch the data. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right, so this is how it is using. Now if you were wondering, sir, how we can implement this as a right inner join, that is a LinQ part. You can check how you can make this as a LinQ right inner join. But now internally you can see it is using a single SQL query to fetch the related data. So now, and whatever the number of students and their corresponding standard information, everything is displayed here. So this is how you can implement eager loading. Eager loading means as soon as the main entity is going to be loaded, the related entities are also going to be loaded. And this concept is called as eager loading because it load immediately. And in this case, internally, it is going to make use of something called SQL join, right? So now what I'm going to discuss is, right, from SQL method, right? From SQL method means what? Now, using this from SQL method in entity framework core, you can execute, right? You can execute raw SQL statement. Now I'm going to show you, right, how you can use raw SQL statement, right? How you can use raw SQL statement along with the include, right? So you can say this is my SQL statement. So whatever right SQL statement you want to execute, for that you need to use this formatable string, right? And this formatable string object is going to be accepted by this from SQL method, right? So here you can see I have written this statement. Select star from students where first name equals to first name. So basically I want to fetch the information of the student whose first name is Pranay. It might be one record, it might be two record, right? So anything, but within this name, only one record is available, right? So in this case, right, what I'm doing here, context dot students dot from SQL, right? So I'm not fetching all the student information, right? I'm only fetching this query, right? And then I'm including the standard. So in this case also, it is eagerly load the standard entity, and then I'm using this faster default method. Means what? If there are multiple students available with this first name, right, then only fetch the first record which is matched with this name, and then I'm printing the first name, last name, and all these things, right? So in this case also you can see how you can use include method using this from SQL, where you need to specify the raw TSQL statement. Now if you run the example, right, run this code, then you will see only student whose first name is Pranay is going to be filled up, right? So you can see the query uses faster but default operator without order by and filter operator. This may lead to unpredictable results. So what he is saying? He is saying that if you are going to fetch the data either using faster default method, means if there are multiple matched record found, do you want to fetch order by salary, order by name in ascending or descending order? Did you miss that order by clause? That what this he is saying, right? So this is just a warning. You can ignore this. Then you can see it is using something called a join and right top joining operation fetch the data, and then it is displaying the data as expected, right? So the point that you need to remember, you can also, right, even execute raw SQL statement, right? Even that is not the case, right? We never do this kind of things. Why? Because this statement I can also rewrite without using that raw SQL statement, right? How? Let's see. I don't want this one, right? So what I'm going to do, that where x dot first name equals to I can also write the statement like this, right? So once you type this thing, now run the application, again you will get the same code, same output, right? So you can see we are also getting the data as expected, right? So basically, if you are a very good at TSQL statement, you can write and you can also execute. And if you are very good at LinQ, you can also write this statement and execute. It's up to you, right? So it's completely depend on your personal preferences. Clear, guys? How you can execute raw SQL statement and how you can load the related entity? Yeah. Yes or no?
Yes, yes.
Now, next, what I'm going to show you how to load multiple related entities, right? So you can see this is student entity. So while I'm loading the student entity, I need to load the standard entity. I need to load the student address, and I also need to load this courses navigation property, right? Means this courses entity. If you want to load multiple related entities, then what you need to do is you need to use this include method multiple times. You need to use the include method multiple times like this. Context dot students include student standard, include student address, include courses, right? So you need to use this include method multiple times. Then you can see I'm looping through the students. I'm fetching the first name, last name, right? And then I'm fetching the student at name, student address. All these are fetching. Why? Because these are reference navigation property. But these courses, it is a collection navigation property. Means one student might be have multiple courses, and for that purpose, what I'm doing here, student dot courses, right? Looping through each courses of a particular student, and then I'm displaying the course ID and a course name, right? So in this way, you can load multiple entities figures, right? Now, if you run the application, then you will see a single select statement is also generated in this case, and this SQL statement what generated using left join, it is an optimized one, right? Don't think that this statement is not optimized. It is definitely optimized one which is going to give better performance, and you can see the data, right? Pranay, whatever the course he has taken, student name, right, and whatever the courses he has taken, all these things it is displaying here. Any doubt related to this particular example? And this is nothing but it's your query syntax. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Right. Now, what do we need to do? We need to understand the other method. That is the new then include method. So then include method is basically used, right? If you want to load multiple levels of a related entities, multiple levels of a related entities. So first of all, we need to understand what we mean by multiple level of a related entities. Now, if you go to the student entity, right, then you will see it includes one related entity called standard, right? If you go to the standard entity, right, then you will see it include a related entity called a teachers. For example, now I'm showing you this thing practically. So this is my main entity, and within this entity I'm having the standard entity. Now if I go to the standard entity, then you will see there is a teacher entity. So now if you go to this teacher entity, then this is the teacher entity. So basically what my requirement is I want to load the standard entity. I want to load this related student entity. Sorry, I want to load the student entity. Along with I want to load the data of the standard entity. Along with I want to load this teachers entities. That means I need to go one level deeper. So earlier what we have seen, right? Earlier we have seen the example where we are loading the student address standard, right? Standard and the courses. But now along with the student and standard, I want to load the corresponding teacher of that particular standard. That means if you want to load something like this, right, multiple levels of related entities, then you need to use what you need to use. You need to use then by right method, right? So now you can see then by then include method, right? First of all, I want to load the students which first name is Pranay. That's fine. I want to include. So for this student entity, right, this is a related entity, standard. So for including the standard entity, I can write this statement, include S such that S dot standard, right? I generally prefer to go with this lambda expression. The reason is if I specify the right string property name, if you misspell the property name, then you will get the runtime error. For example, you can go with the standard, no issue, right? That is also going to work as expected, but here you are getting this error, right? But to overcome these things, you need to use this one, right? But earlier example, right, which we have discussed, if you are not using this one, right, then you can use this standard, right? You can use this student that is going to work as expected, right? So that is fine. But if you are using this include, then you need to specify this as a lambda expression. Why? Because based on the standard table only, this teacher is going to be fetched, right? So this is the reason why you need to specify this using lambda expression. Now this include method means, right? Here S is nothing but it is representing your student entity. Once you use this then include method means now this whatever lambda right property lambda variable we are going to use, this is not representing your student entity, rather it is representing this s means the standard. So this standard table it is pointing to here, right? So inside the standard entity there is a property called the teacher. Yes, there is a property called the teacher, so please load that corresponding teacher data. So this is how it is going to work. Now you can see first name, last name, standard name, and standard description, right? Whatever you can see, right? That is what it is displaying here, right? But to check, right? Then what I'm doing here, I'm checking whether the standard name is not equals to null or not. If it is not equals to null, right? Then I'm looping through the teacher's collection and I'm printing the teacher's data. Right now, if you run this application, then you will see it is going to load the student entity, the related standard entity, and the multiple level of the teacher entity. Right, so you can see this is the first name, last name, standard name, and standard description, and this is going to be the teacher, right? Corresponding teacher. This means the standard having this teacher, right? That is what it is displaying here. So basically, if such kind of a requirement comes, right, where you need to load multiple level of data, right, then in that case you need to go with this, then include method. Clear?
If in case I'm having another table, and again I have to use the include for that table, so
So
I need to write
that
it.
scenario, see, that scenario will never come into your picture, right? So you don't think that I'm having one table, well, another to another, another to another. That kind of scenario will never come into the picture in your real-time application. Up to one level, that is fine. Multiple level means again you need to use this syntax, right? So then include another, then include you need to use, right? Where this,
But that
right?
then include will always, but that then include always will getting from standard only, na?
Sorry.
It will be referring to standard only, na?
No, no. In that case, you can write these things now. So if you go to this teacher entity, right? If you go to standard
Teacher
and
is
if you
a
go to teacher, then you can see it
okay.
is having the standard and the courses. That what you can load here. Clear? Here STD is representing teacher. Here you can say STD is representing standard. Here S is representing students.
Okay.
Clear?
Yes.
Right. So basically here context dot student means this S variable what we are creating, it is pointing to student. And here if I'm using then include this STD, right? It's not pointing to student, it is pointing to the standard property, right? That what you can see standard. And here std is standard. And here, as you can see, we are accessing the teacher. Which type is the teacher? Here std, right? It is pointing to teacher. So instead of this, you can say tch, right? Teacher dot standard. So something like this. So multiple level. So as deeper as you go, so you need to access in the same manner. Right? There is no difference. And guys, here I have provided the interview questions. Right? You can go through the theoretical document. What is the advantages of using eager loading, and what is the disadvantages of using lazy loading? Sorry, eager loading. Later, I will show you what is the difference between eager loading and the lazy loading. Let us quickly understand what is lazy loading, right? So in the case of a eager loading, using a single database query, it is loading the related data. And that is right. And eager loading, we need to use at what scenario? Now, whenever we are sure that this related data we are going to use immediately. Whenever we are sure that the related data we are going to use immediately, then in that case, we need to go with the eager loading. But what is the other scenario? The other scenario is that we are not going to use the related data immediately. Based on the condition, either we need to use the related data or not. That right. So basically, what it means based on the condition, you need to decide whether you need to load the data right eagerly or lazily. Right. So in that case, you need to go with the lazy loading. So let us try to understand what is lazy loading. Lazy loading is a process where entity framework code loads the related entities on demand. Right. So whenever you need the related entities, at that time you are going to load the data. But in this case, guys, remember, in this case, right, even though, right, in this case, suppose in this case, I'm not going to use this information, right? Suppose in this case, I'm not going to use this information, right? I only need this student and standard. Let me explain, use this one as student address. Student address. Now, in this case, just guys tell me. In this case, my requirement is to only load the student and standard information and not the student address. But if I write this include statement, even the student address is not required, it is going to fetch from the database. Right? Even though the student address is not required, it is also going to fetch from the database. But that is what I'm not interested. So what is my intention is later based on some condition, yes, some condition I have written here, and then I came to know that yes, I want to use the student address, and I want to use the student address. Then at that time only I need to load the student address. That is nothing but your lazy loading. Means what? On demand, right? I need to load the related entities, right? So that means the related entities or child entities are loading only when it is being accessed for the first time. Means what? Now, if you see how we can access this student, right? I don't want to include these two things, right? So what my intention is, whenever I use, right? Whenever I use student dot standard here, whenever I use student dot standard here, automatically the standard entity data is going to be low. And from there, I can access the standard name and the standard description. Similarly, whenever I'm going to use student dot, right, dot this one, whenever I'm going to access the student address property for the first time. So student address property for the first time, right? Let me store this as a variable. Let me store this inside a variable address. So whenever I access this student address property for the first time, then only it should make a database to the request to the database. It should execute a separate SQL query in the database, and it should fetch the data and provide to me. So instead of loading the data with my initial entity, right? What I'm trying to do is I want to load the related entities on demand. So whenever I'm saying on demand means what? Means whenever we are going to access the right navigation property for the first time, that time only it should load the related data by issuing a separate SQL query, right? For example, if you go to student data, so whenever I access, right, first of all, I need to load the student entity, and whenever I'm loading the student entity, I don't want to load the student address, student courses, right? Standard information. But whenever I'm going to access the standard entity for the first time, it should give me the student data. Whenever I'm accessing the student address property of the student entity, it should give me the student address data. And whenever I'm accessing this courses property, it should give me the courses information, right? So if that is the scenario, then what we need to do? We need to use eager loading, right? Suppose, for example, here I want to access the courses information, right? So in this example, right, if I write like this, then what will happen? Let's see. Let me run this application in debug mode to see whether the data, the eager loading is working fine or not, right? Now, the application is run, this student entity is created, right? And you can see one select statement is executed and it pastes the data. That's fine, right? The student entity is right. You can see the data is fetched. But now student dot student address, I press F10, I press F10. Now check this address, address is null. Now check this courses. It is also having that count 0 means there is no course information. That means, guys, tell me if I'm accessing the property for the first time, is the related data loading from the database? Does any separate SQL statement is executed here?
No,
If no separate SQL statement is executed, do you think that the data is automatically fetched from the database and stored inside this variable?
no.
So this is the reason why you can see this address is null and this courses is 0. So the point that you need to remember, automatically neither lazy loading is going to work, automatically neither eager loading is going to work, automatically neither explicit loading is going to work. If you want to implement eager loading, you have to use include and exclude, then include method. Similarly, now let us try to understand how we can implement, right, lazy loading in our application, right? So to implement lazy loading, we are having two options. Either we can go with the proxy, or we can load the data without using proxies. Let us try to first understand what is exactly this proxies, right, and how we can load the data using proxies, and then I will discuss how to use, right, how to load the data without using proxies. So the first step is loading the related, implementing lazy loading with proxies. So the first method is to buy, what we need to do is we need to install one package. So we need to install one package, and that package is nothing but your entity framework code data proxies. And once we include this package, right, then what we need to do, we need to enable lazy loading using this lazy loading proxies, right? Where to enable, where to call this method. Now, within the constructor of our DB context class, we need to call this method, right? And then if you want to implement lazy loading, then what we need to do, you need to mark the navigation property as virtual. So basically, if you are going to implement lazy loading by using these proxies, lazy loading with proxies, first of all, you need to install the required NuGet package. Then you need to enable lazy loading, right? And to enable lazy loading, you need to call this use lazy loading proxies method. And then you need to mark the navigation property as postal. People are asking me from right from day one, sir, why you are marking this property as virtual? So if we, once we mark this property as virtual, later we can implement lazy loading. Later we can load this data, right? Related data lazily. On demand, we can load the student standard entity only if we mark this property as virtual. Right now, if someone asks you why we need to mark the property, why we need to mark the navigation property as virtual when we are creating a model class using entity framework code first approach, then you need to tell, once we mark the property as virtual, then we have the ability, then only we can implement lazy loading using proxies in our application. Clear, guys? Why we need to mark this property as virtual?
If you wish to go with the eager loading, so there is no
Then
point
this
of
is not
adding
required.
virtual.
If you are going
Okay.
with eager loading, then there is no relation with this virtual queue. For that purpose, you need to use include and then include method. right? If you mark this as virtual or not virtual, there is no issue. But if you are going with lazy loading, that is true. If you want to implement using this lazy loading with proxies, then only you need to mark this property as virtual. Without proxies, not required, right? That is what also we are going to discuss. Now, let us try to install the required package which is required to load the data, right? So for that purpose, what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to write in NuGet package manager console, right? So this is my solution. Load the required packages, required proxies, right? So currently we are going to implement lazy loading, implementing proxies, right? Then select the project. Guys, give me 1 minute. Okay, so guys, you need to install this proxies, Microsoft.entity proxies. Why with this namespace? Because we want to implement lazy loading using proxies, right? Once you select the latest version, which is 7.0.11, which is compatible with our framework, right? And then click on the install button, preview the changes, click on the OK button, accept the license, right? Once you accept this thing, right, means what? The proxy is get installed. Now to verify whether the proxy, right, whether the NuGet package is installed or not, go to this packages folder and you can see. So this proxies, this is SQL Server, right? DB provider. This is the common tool. This is for creating the right app settings.json file, and this is the proxies package, right? Now, once we install the proxies package, then what we need to do? So once we install the proxies package, right? Again, guys, if you want to install using package manager console, you need to execute this command, right? Install package, and for if you are working with the Visual Studio Code, right, and where you are using a .NET Core CLI, then you need to use this add package command, right? So once the package is installed into our application, then what we need to do? We need to enable lazy loading using lazy loading, right? Use lazy loading proxies. And how we can do this? We can do this, right, by calling this use lazy loading proxies method using the option builder instance, right? So how we can do this? Just copy this code, go to your context class and call this one. So you have this option builder class, and once you have the option builder class, you just need to call this one. So this will enable lazy loading for all the applications, right? So throughout the application, lazy loading is enabled, right? So using this proxies, the point, guys, remember, using this proxies, you can implement, right? Once you implement this concept, right, then lazy loading is enabled for for whole application, right? So once the lazy loading is enabled, then what you need to make sure, you need to mark the navigation property as right virtual. And if you see our classes, right, if you go and check, already we marked the properties as virtual. So you do not need to change, right? If you have not marked this property as virtual, please mark these properties as virtual. And once you change this property to virtual, then again you need to generate the migration command, right? Once you generate the migration command, you need to update the migration command so that the code file, the code base and your database is going to be in sync, right? Once these changes have been done, right, then what we need to do? We need to test whether it is working as expected or not, right? So to make sure, right, whether it is working as expected or not, let me go and change these things, right? First of all, what I'm doing here, I'm accessing the student data. So if I'm accessing the student data, which student ID is 1, so in this case, one SQL script is going to be generated. And then what I'm accessing student address. So in this case, another SQL statement is going to be generate and execute on the database. And then, guys, you can see here what I'm doing. I'm accessing the standard entity, right, for the first time. So another SQL statement is going to be generated. This is going to be happening only for the first time, right? And then you can see I'm not right here. You can see I have commented these courses, right? So what it means? It means this courses entity is not going to be loaded, right? So in this case, only you can see three SQL statement is going to be executed on the database. One is for fetching the student information, another is for fetching the student address, another SQL statement is going to be fetched from the database for this standard. And guys, when it is going to fetch, whenever you access the property for hard time, right? So for example, if I access this property for multiple times, right? So multiple times, then don't think that it is going to generate, right? This standard and write multiple SQL statements, right? Let me run the application and show you this thing practically, right? So you can see one select statement is to fetch the data from the students table, right? Another select statement is to fetch the data from student address table. Another right select statement to fetch the data from the student standards table. And here you can see I'm fetching the standard entity two times, right? But even I'm fetching standard entity for the two times, only one time SQL statement generated. Why? Because once time it needs to load the data. Once it loads the data, then you can access any number of time, no issue. And in this case, course entity is not loaded. Why? Because we have not accessed this property. So once we access this property, right, then only it is going to load the data. Clear, guys? How exactly the lazy loading works?
Yeah. Yes.
Right? So in this case, right, what we are doing in this case, we are implementing the application using proxies with proxies, and this leads to n+1 problem. Guys, remember this lazy loading leads to n+1 problem, right? One is nothing but your main entity, and this n depends the number of a related entity or entities you want to fetch. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. So this is nothing
Then
but
why we are
enabling.
preferring,
Sorry.
if n+1 problem is there, then why we are going with lazy loading?
So that is what I'm going to tell, right? Once we discuss the difference between lazy loading and eager loading, right? Then at that time you will understand these things, right?
Okay.
So basically, see, to simplify this question, right? Now let me ask you. So in this case, right? In this case, if I only need these two data, right? In this case, if I only need these two data, right? Uh, Two data means only the student and the student address. Then in that case, I can go with this approach. If I'm using lazy loading, if I'm using eager loading, if I'm loading all the data, even though those data are not required in my application, does it make sense to go with eager loading?
And, if I want address, then I will include only
See,
address.
that is what I'm saying.
Yes.
If you address what data you need immediately, if you address that this is my student data and corresponding standard data I need immediately in my application, then in that case you can load student and standard information using eager loading. But 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 immediately you don't require that right, what I can say, standard data. Immediately you don't require the student address. Later, based on some condition, you might need student address. Based on some condition, you might need standard. Based on some condition, you might need courses information, right? Then in that case, sometimes
Yes.
you need, sometimes you don't need, right? If that is the scenario, and
Mhm.
again, if the data what you are loading from the database is heavy, then you should not go with this one, because it will take the initial loading time is going to be
Choice.
very heavy if you are working with eager loading function, right? So basically, based on your requirement only, you need to decide whether I need to go with eager loading or I need to go with the lazy loading. Clear?
Okay. Yes.
So first of all, you
Okay.
need to say yourself whether the related data is needed immediately or not. If needed immediately, go with eager loading. If not needed immediately, or based on the condition you need to load the right related data, then don't go with the eager loading. Clear?
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Now one option we have discussed to implement lazy loading with proxies. Now what I'm going to discuss, I'm going to discuss the another option. Another option means lazy loading without proxies. And in the case of without proxies, what we need to do is we need to use lazy loader, lazy loader, right? Lazy loader interface. So let us see how we can implement this. So this lazy loader interface represents a component, right, that is responsible for loading the navigation properties if they have not already been loaded, right? If the navigation properties are not loaded already, then this lazy loader interface provides a component that is nothing but a method called load, right? Using that load method, right, you can load the application properties. It can be embedded directly into the principal entity of the database, right? So directly embedded into the principal entity means whichever your main entity, inside that main entity, you can implement this lazy loader interface. And to use this lazy loader interface, you need to install one package called entity framework core dot abstraction. Let us first install this package, and then I will show you how you can use this lazy loader, right, to implement lazy loading. So go to these tools. Already NuGet package is open. So search for this abstraction, right? So once this Microsoft Entity Framework Code abstraction is open, right, select the project and then click on the install button. Review the changes, click on the I accept button. Once it is showing finished means your package is loaded, right? Now to verify whether this abstraction package, right, is installed or not, go to your solution explorer and verify the same, right? And you can see this abstraction is loaded, right? So once the abstraction package is loaded, then what we need to do is we need to enable the lazy loading inside our main entity. So to enable lazy loading, so what we need to do, we need to modify our principal entity or main entity. So first of all, we need to include this namespace because this namespace provides this lazy loader interface, right? So you need to provide this namespace. You need to create a variable of lazy loader type. This is going to be a private variable. You need to initialize that private variable using one empty constructor, right? One parameterized constructor. Here you need to provide two constructor. One empty constructor which is used for eager loading, another constructor which is basically used for lazy loading. And using that parameterized constructor, you need to implement this lazy loader private variable. Means you need to initialize this one. And then for the navigation property, what you need to do, you need to create a private field and you need to create a public setter and getter property. And within this public setter and getter property, you need to call this lazy load method. So in our example, student is the right, what I can say, student is the principal entity. So let us try to go and update, right, this principal entity to support lazy loading, right? So first of all, you need to create a lazy loader private variable. Let us go step by step. So first of all, you should have a using directive to this infrastructure namespace. Yes, I have provided the namespace. This namespace provides this ILH loader interface. Step one is completed. A private variable for the ILH loader instance. So I have created a private read-only variable, uh, right, and that type is going to be ILH loader instance an empty constructor and one parameterized constructor. That parameterized constructor take ILH loader right as a parameter, and that is going to initialize this ILH loader instance. So you can see this is my empty constructor, and this is going to be used when we are going with a eager loading concept or a right simple concept, right? And this is my parameterized constructor, and this parameterized constructor taking this ILH loader, right, instance, and whatever the instance it received, that instance is used to initialize this private variable. That means, and in this case, the dependency injection, the built-in dependency injection, right, is going to inject the instance, and using that instance, we are initializing this variable, right? First of all, this three piece of information is clear. How to use that this variable I will show you. But for now, first of all, you need to have a reference to this namespace. You need to create a private variable, one public constructor, empty constructor, and one parameterized constructor. The parameterized constructor is basically used to initialize this lazy loader instance. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So once this is done, then what we need to do, we need to create a private field for the navigation property and a public setter getter property for the navigation properties, right? So basically, if you know the concept called right properties, so property is nothing but it is just a medium of data communication. The data is actually going to stored in the variable. right? So the same concept we need to implement here. This is my private property called standard, and right, this is my private field or variable, you can say standard, and this is my public property, and this public property is going to store the data inside this variable, right? So you can see this is my getter, and in this case, it is going to load the data, and using the setter, whatever value we need to set, right? So basically, what we need to do, so we just need to call this lazy loader, right? You can see this is my instance, and you need to call this load method. This is nothing but your current instance, the student entity, and then we need to fill up the student address. That's it. So with these changes, right, eager loading is enabled for this student address. So in this case, virtual is required, not required, right? Because virtual is only required whenever we are loading the data using proxy. Without proxy, virtual is not required. If you mark this property as virtual, then no issue, right? So in this case, you can see we just need to call this load method, and you know how to implement getter and setter. In the case of a getter, we need to return this property value, and here this property value is also going to return, but for returning first time it is going to load the data, right, using this method, right? And then again, what I'm doing the same thing, right? For the student address, I'm doing the same thing for the courses. Clear? Or any question? So you just need to call this load method, which is going to load the related data. If that is not loaded, if loaded, don't think that it is going to load the data again and again by issuing a different select statement, executing different select statement. So this is how you can load, right? This is how you can implement eager loading, right? So to test these things, right, whether it is working fine or not, right? What I'm going to do is we need to modify this context class, because in context class this lazy loading is enabled, so we need to comment this one. So once we comment this one, lazy loading is not enabled, right? So once we comment this one, then what we need to do, we need to run the application, right? So we do not need to do any changes within our main program, right? Okay, let me uncomment this one, right, and see whether it is working as expected or not, whether it is loading the data or not, right? You can see one select statement is executed here, another select statement is executed here, another select statement is executed here. So three select statement is executed separately, means lazy loading is working as expected. So basically you have two options. You can go with this option, and in order to work this option, you must declare the property as virtual. And if you don't want with this, go with this option, you can go with this lazy loader interface option. So this is without proxies, right? Now, clear, guys?
Why two options are there? Is there any difference between them except from writing the code?
Oh, see, there are multiple options. Whichever options you like most, that what you can do. And if you are going with this option, the first option means lazy loading is enabled for whole application. Second option means you have the flexibility, whether, right, flexibility in the sense, sometimes you can decide I'm going with lazy loading, right, I'm not going with lazy loading. So in the second option, right, if you are going with the first option, right, first option means what, lazy loading is enabled for all the properties. And using the second option, what you can decide, right? You can decide I can only enable lazy loading for the standard property. I don't want to enable lazy loading for this property. For example, in this case, you can uncomment these things, right? Once you uncomment these things, right, then what will happen? In this case, lazy loading is enabled for the standard and lazy loading is enabled for the courses, but lazy loading is not enabled for the student address. But if you are going with the first option, right, using proxies, once you enable this one, means what? Lazy loading is enabled for all the properties. So basically, the flexibility they are provide, right? So it is up to you where you want to enable, where you don't want to enable. That's what this means, right? So, okay, let me comment these things, right? Now, now the most important question that should comes to here, right? Once I enable lazy loading, right? Later, Can I disable lazy loading for my application? Can I enable lazy loading for some of the entities? Yes, that is possible. So for that purpose, what we need to do is we need to use change tracker dot the lazy loading enabled property, right? So how you can disable lazy loading? So to disable lazy loading, so you need to go to your DP context class. Here you can access the so this dot change tracker, right? Dot enable lazy loading enabled, and here by default this property is set to true, means lazy loading is enabled, right? Whether you use this option, right, or whether you use this option, right, the second option I lazy loader or that using proxy, right, by default this property value is going to decide whether lazy loading is enabled for your application or not. By default this value is true. Now make this value as false. Once you make this value as false, right, now let us run the application and see whether the related data is going to be loaded or not. See, only one select statement means what? Lazy loading is not enabled. Clear, guys? How to disable lazy loading for whole application? Yeah. Yes or no?
Yes.
Now, what is my requirement? My requirement, I don't want to disable lazy loading for whole application. Sometimes I want to enable and disable lazy loading. Then also that is also possible. How? For that purpose, wherever you want to enable lazy loading, there you can enable lazy loading. If you don't want, you can disable the lazy loading. How? For example, I'm fetching the data. I'm fetching the data from the student table. And here, and you can see here, I enable the lazy loading. But here I'm using the context dot change tracker lazy loading enable false. So once I set this to false means now if I am accessing the standard property means at this point lazy loading is disabled. So it is not going to load the data by issuing a separate query. Again, what I'm deciding now, I want to enable lazy loading. Yes, I can. How? Just make this property value to true. And once you make this property value to true, if you access the student address property, then what it will do, it is going to load the data from the database, right? So it is also, right, you have the flexibility that where you want to enable and where you want to disable, where you want to use lazy loading, that you can enable, and if you don't want, you can disable. See, first select statement, no issue. Second time you can see there is no separate database SQL query because at this point lazy loading is disabled, and then we enable the lazy loading, and then you can see we are fetching the data from the database. Clear, guys? How to enable and disable lazy loading for whole application and for some of the right part of your application,
Yes.
right? And guys, this lazy loading enable and lazy disable, it is only right if you are implementing here means it is only related to this context object. If you are having a different context object, then that will check, that will follow, right, what you specified here. Clear? Basically, whenever you are creating an instance, right, of that context object, that lazy loading property value is set to true. Later, I'm modifying that property value to false or true as per my requirement, right? So this is specific to your context object, right? Clear or not?
Yes. One
Okay.
question, what
Now,
is this change tracker?
so this change tracker means it is the concept, right, which is going to keep track what's happening with the context object, right? How many entities are being added, what is the state of each entity, right? What SQL statement I need to generate, whether I need to generate, right, select statement, insert statement, update statement, delete statement, whether the right proxy is enabled or not, caching is enabled or not. All these things context object is tracking, and how it is tracking, where it is storing all this information, everything is going to be stored inside this change tracker, right? So if you go to this change tracker, then you will see entity framework or change tracking for information, right? So any changes, whatever happening with the context object, everything is going to be tracked by this change track, right? Clear?
Mm,
Right? You
yes.
see auto detect changes enabled, lazy loading enabled, right? Query tracking behavior, delete or orphans timing, right? Or cascade delete timing, right? Everything it is also having the instance of context state manager change, right? All these things are going to be tracked by this change tracker. right? So suppose you can see context object is generating the insert statement, select statement. How it is generating? Where it will get this information? All this information are stored inside this change tracker. Right, so this is the right concept that what now let us try to understand the difference between lazy loading and eager loading. Definition: eager loading involves simultaneously loading related entities along with the main entity in a single query. In a single query, it is going to load the data retrieval. All required data is retrieved from the database upfront, minimizing the need for additional queries during runtime. So using a single query, it will retrieve all the data. Usage: when to use eager loading is suitable when you know, right, you need related data for a specific operation and you want to minimize the database round trip. And if you know what are the related data you want immediately, right, for a specific operation, and if you want to minimize the right database round trip, then you need to go. How to implement it? You can implement this by using this include and right, then include method. Advantages: reduce database round trips. Only one round trip is there. Improves initial query performance. Means with a single query, it is going to return all the data. Simplifies code by providing consistent and predictable data access path. Right. So, right, it is very simple. Whenever you are going to load, right, the data, the related data, you just need to use include and exclude. This may lead to overfetching of data. Sometimes what happens now, as a developer, we just write the include and whatever the properties, all the properties we have provided, even though some of the properties we do not require, right? So in that case, right, it is going to fetch the data which is not required. Complex queries can be generated. Definitely, if you are using multiple related right operations, right, then the query is going to be complex because it is going to use multiple joins. It might be not suitable for scenario such as cases where only subset of related data is related, right? If you don't need all the data, only few data is required, then you should not go with this approach. Lazy loading means loading the related data on demand, and whenever you access the navigation property for the first time, at that time only it is going to retrieve the data. Related data is fetched from the database as a separate operations, right? Uses: lazy loading is suitable when you want to defer loading related data until it's needed, right? Whenever the related data is needed, at that time we want to defer the loading of this data, then in that case you need to go with it. And method means you can write, you have two options, right? What are the options? You can write to go with proxies, and without proxies, with proxies you need to use ilazy loader. With proxies you need to mark the property as virtual, and then you need to enable the same thing within the on configuring method, right? Advantages: minimize initial query execution time, right? So it only fetch the master entity data, not the related data. Means you will get the data immediately. Efficiently uses memory while loading the needed data only, right? So what it means? It means whatever the data is required, that data it is only going to fetch and store. Means only less memory it is going to take, and it provides on-demand access. So whenever you need, just load it. And this can lead to n1 query problem, right? So because if you are write multiple queries, then for each query it is going to generate a new SQL statement. Performance override when accessing lazy loaded properties, right? Require careful management to avoid unexpected data retrieval and optimize the performance, right? So basically, so see, if someone asks you what is the difference or when to use, right, eager loading and lazy loading, without looking at the application requirement and what we exactly want to achieve, we cannot simply say, right, lazy loading is better than eager loading or eager loading is better than lazy loading. Both are having own advantages and disadvantages, and based on their right, based on our application requirement, we need to use either lazy loading or eager loading. If we are going with a right eager loading, it will internally use something called SQL join, and which is going to retrieve all the required data at the same time, right? But if those data are not required for our application, then definitely it is going to kill your application performance. On the other hand, eager loading means separate database call for the separate or the related data. If those related data are not required immediately or based on some condition, we need to load those data, then in that case, we need to go with eager, we need to go with lazy loading. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Okay. So the last concept what we are going to discuss today is explicit loading. And this explicit loading, right, it's basically very similar to our lazy loading concept, right? Even if lazy loading is disabled in our application, it is still possible to lazily load the related entities. For example, right, so what I'm going to achieve is I want to disable this one. I want to disable this one. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this property value to false. Means what? Lazy loading is disabled for our application. If lazy loading is disabled for our application, but later you want to load some of the data, right, by implementing lazy loading concept, then is that possible? Yes, that is possible. But right, but if you disable the lazy loading concept, right, and if you try to, right, and if you run this application, right, lazy loading is disabled. Now, if I run the application, do you think that related data is going to be loaded?
No.
No. You can see that standard and address is going to be empty. But my question is, even though the lazy loading is disabled, right, I want to fetch the related data. Is that possible? Yes, that is possible. So how? We need to use the concept called explicit loading. Let me explain this concept directly so that you will get more idea, right? So this is my context object, and I'm fetching the first right student information whose student ID is one. So there is no issue with this object. Now what is my requirement? My requirement, we need to load standard entity explicitly. And if you want to load something explicitly, then what method you need to use? You need to use load method. But the point that you need to remember is, right, whatever the related entity you want to load, first of all, identify which type of an entity is this, right? If you go to this class, then you will see the standard, it is a reference entity. Student address, it is a reference type entity. This courses, it is a collection entity. That means we are having two types of related entities, right? So as we are having two types of a related entity, based on the type, we need to decide which method I need to use. First of all, you need to use this context.entry method, right? I want to fetch the related entity of which main entity. I want to fetch the related entity of this student entity. So that student entity I need to pass to this entry method, and then I need to decide what kind of a related entity you want to fetch. I want to fetch standard. So this standard is a reference navigation property or it's a collection navigation property? It's a reference navigation property. You need to use this reference method. And once you use this reference method, then you just need to call this load method. So this load method is going to load the standard reference data, right, which is related to the student entity. And then, right, if data is fetched, right, then you can print the data. Now this is student address, right? So in this case, you can see I have load the, right? So once this statement is executed, what you will do, you this will generate a select SQL statement, execute the statement, paste the data, and store the data inside the standard property. Then you can check and you can see whether the standard is filled with the related data or not. If filled, then it is going to display the data. If it is not filled, then it is going to show that standard entity is not loaded. Now, standard. So in this case, as you can see, I have loaded the standard entity. So the standard entity means in this case, this method, this block is going to be executed. But in this case, do I need the related student address? In this case, do I load the student address using the load method? No, I have not loaded. So in this case, it is going to display this message student address entity is not loaded. Now, now I want to load the courses, right? Courses means which type of property is this? It is a collection and application property. So as it is a collection application property, I need to use this collection method and call the load method. Right, so here you can see right here you can see I have used the reference method. Why? Because this standard is a reference navigation property, but in this case this courses, it is a collection property, so I have to use this collection method and call this load method. Once you call this load method, then it will load all the courses related data from the database and store inside the courses property of the student entity, and then I'm just showing whether the data is loaded or not. If loaded, right, then using a for each loop, it is going to display the data. If not loaded, it is going to display right? This entity. So in this case, whether the lazy loading is disabled or enabled, no matter. So in this case, we are explicitly loading the data. Right now, if you run the application, then you will see. Right. So this is my select statement. This is another select statement. Why this is another select statement? Because, right, in this case, it is going to load the data, right, student data. And here it is going to load the student data based on the student ID, right? But in this case, right, but whenever I'm going to load the courses, it is going to make use of something called join, right? So using join, it is going to paste the related data and then it is displaying the data, right? But for the student address, it is displaying student entity is not loaded. Why? Because if you look at this example, student address we have not loaded, right, using the load method. So this is how explicitly loading is work in our application. Clear, guys? See, if you want to load any reference type data, you need to use this reference from method. And if you want to load collection data, you need to use this collection method. But whenever you are going to load the related entity, that related entity you need to pass either to this reference method or to this collection method. But this related entity must belongs to a main entity. That main entity you need to pass to this entry method. And finally, you just need to call this load. That is how this is going to work. Clear? And these are the advantages and the disadvantages of this explicit loading. You can go with the things, right? And then I'm going to show I'm putting the difference between explicit loading, lazy loading, and eager loading. This explicit loading and lazy loading functionality both are same, but here explicit loading gives you more control over than this one, right? So right, so not more control, you can consider both are same, right? So both are same, but yes, if lazy loading is disabled, you can go with this explicit loading, right? Right, so basically what it means if you have not if you have not installed any third party packages, and if you have not created these properties like this, right, simple properties there, and if you have not configured something like this, and later you want to explicitly load the data, you can go with this approach, right? So all these three approaches are exist, and in a real-time application, you will see a combination, a mix of both these approach. Sometimes you need to use eager loading as per your business requirement if you need the data immediately. Sometimes you need to go with the lazy loading whenever the data, right, is not required immediately or based on some condition, you need the data. Clear, guys? Any question, guys? Right?
For explicit loading, we need not have to do any settings, no external
No, no,
files, nothing, right?
nothing is required. So in this case, this is the reason why you can see I have disabled the lazy loading from here on. So lazy loading is disabled. So explicit loading means you need to explicitly load the data.
So the virtual also is not required for the
Not
explicit.
required, not required. Virtual is only required whenever
Okay,
you want to implement lazy loading
either.
using proxy.
Okay.
Okay. Any question, guys, from anyone? Thank you, guys.